Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we're going to be looking at the fourth and final stage of our cardiac cycle called the isovolumetric relaxation stage. Alright, so let's go and get started. So what did we see in our previous video when we talked about the third stage, or the ventricular systole stage? So we said that the left ventricle went up all the way to 120 millimeters of mercury as it fully contracted, and the right ventricle went up to around 25 millimeters of mercury as it fully contracted. And we said when it did that, right, when it fully contracted, we said our pulmonary artery was at around 10 millimeters of mercury, and we said our aorta was at around 80 millimeters of mercury, right? And keep in mind that in our isovolumetric contraction phase, or our second phase of a cardiac cycle, right, our atrioventricular valves are actually snapped shut, okay? So our atrioventricular valves actually snapped shut, so they should be snapped shut. And during our ventricular systole phase, our semilunar valves opened, all right? So they opened. And so we said that blood would flow from high to low pressure, right, and high to low pressure here. And at the same time, we said that there was blood filling the atria. When we took the left atria, for example, we already went through the A wave, right? The A wave. Then we already went through the C wave, right? Where we had a rapid increase during the isovolumetric contraction phase, all right? And then, so it's the C wave, and then we said that we have a V wave going, right? As the atria are filling with blood. So right here, we have the V wave going, all right? So I should actually draw it in gray like that. All right, as the left atrium is filling with blood. All right, so now what happens? So now the left ventricle has contracted, right? And what happens is that we actually see increase in the pressures in the aorta and the pulmonary arteries also. So if we actually go and write it down, so let's go and write it down. So remember we said it started at 0 first, and then we said it could have gone to around 7, right? Again, these are just, we're just trying to get numbers here so we can see, like, visually the pressure difference and why the valves are closed, right, in each stage. So 7, and then we said it can go to about 70 to 75 millimeters of mercury, and then once it fully contracts, it goes to about 120. For the right ventricle, we said it starts at 0, right, and then we said it can go to about 3 millimeters of mercury, then to about 8 to 9 millimeters of mercury as it's contracting very slowly, right? And like we're not saying right away. And then it can go to up to 25 once it's fully contracted at high pressure, right? So once that happens, we said that the blood will be ejected out. And again, the pressure in the aorta and pulmonary artery will increase. But what's going to happen now is after it's contracted, after ventricles have contracted, what is it going to try to do now? Now it's trying to relax again. So after it contracts, so if we take the left ventricle, for example, after it contracts, now it's going to slowly start to drop in pressure again, okay? Because now it's trying to get to the ventricular diastole phase, right? It's not there yet. It's still dropping. So it goes from 120, all right? It goes from 120, and then let's just say it's starting to relax, but very slowly. If we take it very slowly, let's say it goes down to 100, and then it goes down to 90, right? Then it goes down to 90. And then let's say it goes down to 70, all right? Now, as soon as it goes down to 70, or this is just sample numbers, right? These are just sample numbers, but the reality is, as soon as it goes below 80, right? As soon as our left ventricle pressure goes below 80, then our aortic valve is going to snap shut. All right, but okay, so let's just take our left ventricle for example for right now, right? When our left ventricle contracts, right, blood is pushed here, and because we have a lot of fluid entering the aorta, right, the aorta is stretched, and it actually increases the pressure of the aorta also. Let's say the pressure of the aorta goes to about 120 also, right? But as the pressure in the aorta decreases, the pressure in the left ventricle will decrease faster, all right? So once the pressure in the aorta comes back to 80, by the time that happens, our left ventricle, our pressure in the left ventricle will be lower, okay? In this case, we set an example of 70. The second our left ventricle pressure is lower, the blood that was just pushed out during ventricular systole in our aorta will want to start to come back, right? High to low pressure. But we don't want that. We want blood to flow one way. So then our aortic valve will snap shut, okay? It'll snap shut, not allowing blood to come back from the aorta to the left ventricle. Let's pause there for a moment. Let's go to our right ventricle. All right. So when our right ventricle contracted, right, at about 25 millimeters of mercury, our blood went from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery, right? So let's say now, after it went to 25 millimeters of mercury, right, let's say it starts to decrease now, right? Because now the right ventricle is trying to relax too. So let's say it goes down. Let's say we're trying to go slow, right? So let's say it goes down to like 20, right? Then it goes down to 15, right? Then it goes down to 15, and then it goes down to 8, right? Then it goes down to 8 millimeters of mercury. So that's just sample numbers, right? It's not at 0 yet, though. Okay, so what's going to happen is, like we said for the left ventricle, when the right ventricle contracts, the pressure in the pulmonary artery will also rise. And let's say it rises to 25, right? But soon, once the pressure starts to come back down in the pulmonary artery, the pressure in the right ventricle will decrease faster. So that means that once the pressure in the pulmonary artery comes back to 10 eventually, right, after the right ventricle contracts, the pressure in the right ventricle, the second the pressure in the pulmonary artery comes back to 10, the pressure in the right ventricle will be lower than that. In this case, we said, let's say it's about 8. The second the right ventricle's pressure is lower, right, blood would want to flow from high to low, but we don't want that. So our pulmonic valve will snap shut. Okay, and when our semilunar valves snap shut, because remember this happens together at once, right? When our pulmonic and aortic valves snap shut, that's our dub sound. All right, so that makes up our dub sound of our heartbeat sounds. All right, so now in this particular moment, right, in our isovolumetric relaxation phase, we can see that all four of our valves are snapped shut right now. All right, and in this particular moment, when we're at 8 millimeters of mercury, at this moment, the pressure is still not lower than the right atrium, right? So if we're talking about the right ventricle, if we're at 8 right now, right, the pressure in the right ventricle is lower than the pulmonary artery. That's why the pulmonic valve snaps shut. But, however, the pressure in the right ventricle at this moment during isovolumetric relaxation is not lower than the right atrium. It's actually still higher than the right atrium. That's why at this moment the tricuspid valve will still stay shut. Same thing in the left ventricle. If we say we're around 70, right, and if we can even decrease that, right, let's go back to even 7, right, that we began with, right? So if we go down to 7 millimeters of mercury is lower than the pressure in the aorta. So of course the aortic valve will stay shut. But however, right, the pressure of 7 millimeters of mercury in the left ventricle is still greater than the pressure in the left atrium. Okay, so the pressure of 7 millimeters of mercury in the left ventricle is still greater than the left atrium, which means that the mitral valve will want to stay shut still. That's why in the isovolumetric relaxation phase, because all four valves are shut in this particular phase, no blood is leaving the ventricles or no blood is entering the ventricles. Okay, and this is where we hear the dub sound, right? Because this is where the pulmonic valves, or the pulmonic and aortic valve, or also known as semilunar valves, snap shut. Okay, and remember the V wave is still increasing because we're also seeing blood is still getting dumped into our left atrium. All right, blood's still getting dumped into our left atrium. And if we're talking about the left atrium, the V wave is still increasing. And also, the blood is still getting dumped into the right atrium, right? Still because of the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, coronary sinus, and the coronary sinus, all right? And so this is the last phase. And after this, what's going to happen? Well, the pressure is eventually in the ventricles going to go to 0. That will trigger the opening of the atrioventricular valves, and then we will start our cardiac cycle all over again from ventricular diastole and atrial systole. All right, because once the atrioventricular valves open, blood that has been dumping in, right, blood that has been slowly pooling in into our atria, right, is gonna passively flow down 75 to 80% of it. Then at the end of ventricular diastole, our atria are gonna contract, right? For our left atrium, when our atrium contracts, we're going to see the A wave again, and everything's going to start over again. All right? And so remember that diastole is longer than systole. Ventricular diastole is longer than ventricular systole. All right, remember we said in our previous videos that ventricular systole is 0.3 seconds and ventricular diastole is 0.5 seconds, together making a total of 0.8 seconds. All right, and another thing to mention is that once our ventricular diastole and atrial phase will start, right, phase 1 of the cardiac cycle, once the pressures drop to 0 again, and we said that the atrioventricular valve is open, right? So in the left atrium, once the atrioventricular valve is open, right, in the case of the left ventricle or the left side of the heart, when the mitral valve opens, we said the blood would pool down, right? 75 to 80% of the blood will go down to the ventricles passively. Right then and there, for our left atrium, our V wave will start to drop, right? Because our V wave represented the blood pooling into our left atrium. Once blood starts to leave, the pressure will start to decrease and our V wave will drop. All right, and that's all. That's the 4 stages of the cardiac cycle that I wanted to get through, right, in the 4 videos. I hope these videos made sense to you guys. I hope to see you guys in my future videos where we'll talk about more cool topics about biochem, physics, and chem. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, and subscribe. See you guys later, and stay safe.